In today's episode, we'll be sharing some chilling college horror stories. But before we begin, consider giving us a like. It helps a lot. Also, if you've got a true story of your own, send to me, and I'll probably add it to a future video. It started like any other casual friendship. I was a community college soccer player, balancing classes, practice, and the occasional part-time job. My schedule wasn't particularly flexible, but twice a week I had an hour-long gap between classes. That's when I started hanging out with him. He worked in the athletics department and seemed friendly enough. I'd see him around campus, always smiling, always quick with a joke or a friendly wave. One day, while I was sitting in the library trying to cram for a test, he wandered in, sat down across from me, and started chatting. It felt harmless at first, just two students killing time. The conversations were light: sports, school, the occasional gripe about professors. Over time, he started bringing small things with him. Chocolates, for example. He'd hand them to me with a casual comment like, "Oh, I had extras," or "I don't really like these, you can have them." At the time, it didn't feel odd. If anything, I thought he was just being polite. Looking back, though, there was a pattern, a rhythm to his kindness that now feels calculated. He rarely asked about me directly, but he'd pick up on details: my class schedule, where I liked to eat, even what routes I took to and from campus. He made it seem like these were things I offered up, like he'd learned them naturally through conversation. The season ended, and with it, so did my desire to play soccer. I was tired of the long practices and wanted to focus on my studies. I decided to quit and planned to avoid scheduling the same hour-long gap next semester. At the time, it seemed like a practical decision. I had no idea it would set something else into motion. Winter break was supposed to be a relief, a chance to reset and prepare for the next semester. But it became the start of something much darker. It began with small things. I'd see his car parked down the street when I left for class in the morning, or when I came home in the afternoon. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe he lived nearby, or maybe he was visiting someone. But it kept happening, day after day, and the unease started to creep in. Then, he started showing up at places I'd mentioned on social media. At first, I didn't connect the dots. I'd post about going to a coffee shop, and he'd appear there, claiming he just happened to be passing through. But then it started happening at odd locations, places he had no reason to be. One evening, I was out with friends, and I noticed him sitting in the corner of the restaurant, not eating, not talking to anyone, just there. Another time, I saw him parked in the lot outside a gym I'd mentioned in a post. That's when I realized he was following me. The worst moment came when I caught him taking photos. I had just stepped out of my car in a grocery store parking lot when I noticed a flash from the corner of my eye. Turning sharply, I saw him sitting in his car, phone angled toward me. He didn't even try to hide it. My stomach dropped, and I froze for a moment before rushing into the store, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that maybe I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew better. The fear became unbearable, pressing down on me like a constant weight. I decided to report him to the police. Surely, they could do something. Sitting in the station, I described everything: the car outside my house, the appearances at places I posted about, the photos. The officer nodded as I spoke, jotting down notes, but I could sense the hesitation in his demeanor. When I finished, he leaned forward and said something that crushed what little hope I had left. "Unfortunately, nothing he's done is technically illegal. He's on public property, and we can't prove any harmful intent." My stomach churned. I felt exposed, helpless. I wanted to scream, to demand why his actions weren't enough for them to act. But I nodded stiffly and left, feeling more alone than ever. The stalking didn't stop. His car would be parked just far enough away to seem coincidental, but close enough to make me feel watched. Every time I walked out of my house, I scanned the street, searching for the familiar shape of his car. And when I did see it, my heart would drop, and I'd retreat inside, locking the door behind me. My social media became a liability. I realized he was using my posts to track me, to place himself wherever I was. Reluctantly, I stopped posting altogether. It felt like losing a piece of my life, like surrendering a small freedom, but I had no choice. The fear consumed every part of my routine. Simple errands became daunting tasks, and I stopped going out with friends, terrified of running into him. My world shrank, and I felt like a prisoner in my own life. I didn't tell my parents. I wanted to, but I couldn't. They'd overreact, show up at his workplace or his home, and I knew that might only escalate things. So I kept it to myself, a constant burden I couldn't share. Each day blurred into the next, a cycle of paranoia and exhaustion. I avoided places where he might show up, mapped out alternate routes to and from class, and kept my head down at all times. Despite my precautions, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was always one step ahead, that he knew exactly what I was doing before I did it. The few times I saw his car near my house, I would duck inside and wait. Minutes felt like hours as I watched him linger, engine idling, before driving away. It was as though he wanted me to know he was there, a silent reminder that he wasn't going anywhere. And then one day, he was gone. It wasn't sudden, exactly. The appearances became less frequent, the sightings of his car farther apart. Weeks went by without him showing up at all. I told myself it was over, that he'd finally lost interest, but the relief was tentative, fragile. I never found out why he stopped. Maybe he grew bored, or maybe someone else caught his attention. Maybe the police did pay him a visit, though they never told me. Friday nights at the college bar were always the same. Loud music, sticky floors, and a crowd packed so tightly you could barely move. I wasn't much of a drinker, and the chaos of the scene wasn't really my style, but my friends had dragged me out, insisting I needed to live a little. So there I was, nursing a soda while they scoped out potential one-night stands, laughing and shouting over the bass-heavy music. I stood near the edge of the bar, watching the crowd ebb and flow under the neon lights. That's when she appeared. Her name was Alexia, or Alex, as she quickly clarified with a playful smile. She was confident, outgoing, the kind of person who made herself the center of attention without trying too hard. "Hey," she said, leaning against the bar, "you look like you could use a drink." I laughed nervously, waving my soda. "I'm good, thanks." She tilted her head, her eyes scanning me with curiosity. "No alcohol? You're an interesting one. Tell you what, I'll buy you something anyway. My treat. Just keep me company for a bit." It was hard to say no to her energy, so I stayed. We talked for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 30 minutes. She asked a lot of questions about my classes, my friends, what I liked to do for fun. It felt nice to be the focus of someone's attention, especially someone who seemed genuinely interested in me. But looking back, there were small things that didn't add up. She dodged questions about herself, redirecting the conversation whenever I asked where she was from or what she studied. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking she was just being mysterious. As the night wore on, Alex leaned closer, her tone shifting. "You know," she said, her voice smooth, "we could have a lot more fun somewhere else. What do you say we get out of here?" Her sudden suggestion caught me off guard. I stammered something about how I wasn't looking for anything serious, hoping she'd take the hint. But instead of backing off, she smiled knowingly. "No pressure," she said quickly. "We don't have to do anything. We can just hang out, watch a movie or something." She reached for my hand. "Come on, let's go. No point wasting the night in this place." Her insistence made me hesitate. Something about her eagerness felt wrong. My friends had always warned me about situations like this, jokingly saying, "Trust your gut." For the first time, I understood what they meant. "I'll call an Uber," I said, trying to stall. Alex shook her head, her grip tightening on my hand. "No need. I parked just around the corner. Let's go." Reluctantly, I let her guide me through the crowded bar toward the exit. Outside, the air was crisp and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos inside. My unease grew with each step as she led me down the street, away from the main entrance. When we reached the car, a black Honda Civic parked in a pickup-only lane, my stomach dropped. The interior lights were on, and I could clearly see 3 men sitting inside. They didn't look like casual passengers or friends waiting for a ride. They looked expectant. "You said you were alone," I blurted, stepping back instinctively. She froze for a moment, her cheerful demeanor faltering. "Oh, they're just my friends," she said, too casually. "They're not coming with us." But the alarm bells in my head were deafening now. Every instinct told me to get away, and fast. The realization hit me like a slap in the face. There were 3 men in the car, their expressions shadowed by the dim overhead light, but their presence was undeniable. They sat unnervingly still, their attention clearly focused on me. I stepped back, my movements slow and deliberate, trying not to escalate the situation. "I think I'll pass," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. Alex's smile dropped entirely. Her friendly, playful demeanor shifted into something harder, colder. "What's the problem?" she snapped. "I said they're not coming with us." She stepped closer, her body language growing more aggressive as I continued to back away. The men in the car didn't move, but their silence felt louder than anything Alex was saying. My heart raced as I scanned the empty street, weighing my options. "I'm heading back inside," I muttered, turning sharply on my heel. Her voice followed me, sharp and venomous. "Fine, go ahead!" "Loser!" she yelled, her words echoing in the quiet. The sudden hostility only confirmed my suspicions. I didn't look back. I forced myself to keep walking, my legs stiff with fear, until I reached the bar's entrance. The bouncer gave me a confused look as I pushed past him, but I didn't stop until I spotted my group of friends, still laughing and oblivious at a corner table. I sat down, trying to steady my breathing. One of my friends noticed my pale face and asked if I was okay. "I'm fine," I lied, grabbing my drink and taking a long sip. But I couldn't shake the image of that car, the men, or Alex's sudden shift in behavior. Even inside the crowded bar, I couldn't shake the tension. Every time someone walked past our table or glanced in my direction, I flinched, half expecting Alex to storm back in. I stayed close to my friends, hoping their presence would keep me safe if she tried anything. But she never came back. Still, the encounter replayed in my mind, each detail sharper than the last. Her insistence, the car, the way the men sat there, waiting. My stomach churned as I realized how close I'd come to making a mistake I might not have been able to walk away from. When we finally left the bar, I stuck with my friends, keeping them between me and the street. I scanned the area, searching for the black Honda Civic, but it was gone. The relief was short-lived, replaced by a gnawing anxiety that followed me all the way home. Once inside my apartment, I locked the door and double-checked the windows, something I'd never done before. The silence of my room felt oppressive, my thoughts racing with what-ifs. What if I'd gotten in that car? What if I'd ignored the warning signs? The next morning, I decided I couldn't let it go. Sitting at my desk, I pulled up the city's anonymous tip line and filled out a report. I described Alex as best I could, her height, her hair color, the way she spoke. I gave the details about the black Honda Civic, its location, and the men inside. It wasn't much, but I hoped it would be enough for someone to investigate. Even if nothing came of it, at least I had done my part. As I hit submit, a wave of relief washed over me. I couldn't erase what had happened, but I could make sure someone else might be warned. The thought gave me a small sense of closure, though the unease lingered. To this day, I've never seen Alex or that car again. I've learned to trust my instincts, to recognize when something feels off and act on it. That night could have ended very differently, but thank goodness it didn't. It started innocently enough. I met him in one of my general education classes, the kind where you rarely remember anyone after the semester ends. He was quiet but friendly, always ready with a smile or a quick comment about the lecture. At first, I thought little of him beyond a casual classmate, but something about him felt off. It wasn't anything I could pinpoint, just a gut feeling that lingered whenever we talked. Despite the unease, I brushed it aside and allowed the friendship to grow. It seemed harmless, after all. He wasn't like some of the more forward guys on campus, and I thought I was safe keeping things platonic. But as the weeks passed, his interest in me became clear. Small compliments turned into awkward declarations of affection, and I knew I had to draw a line. "I'm flattered, but I'm not interested in anything beyond friendship," I told him one afternoon, keeping my tone firm but kind. He nodded, seeming to accept it. For a brief time, I believed that would be the end of it. But then his behavior started to shift. He began showing up in places I frequented, outside my classroom, near the coffee shop I visited before lectures, even by the library corner I preferred for studying. He wouldn't approach me or speak, just linger at a distance, watching. It was unnerving, but I convinced myself it was a coincidence, or that he was simply trying to adjust to the boundaries I'd set. Looking back, I realized how naive I was. It wasn't long before I couldn't ignore the pattern. He wasn't coincidentally in the same place as I was. He was following me. Everywhere I turned, it felt like his shadow was there. Even when I didn't see him directly, I felt the weight of his gaze, the unshakable sense that I was being watched. I confronted him again, forcing myself to speak with confidence despite the tremor in my voice. "I need you to stop following me," I said bluntly when I caught him outside my classroom one day. He didn't argue or deny it. He simply nodded and walked away, leaving me with a hollow sense of relief. For a time, it seemed like he had listened. I stopped seeing him around campus, and my routine felt normal again. But the reprieve was short-lived. The absence of his presence wasn't comforting. It was unsettling. It wasn't that he'd stopped. He'd just changed his approach. Friends began mentioning seeing him in places I had been, or overhearing him asking questions about me. I'd find myself glancing over my shoulder in the middle of the day, unsure if I was imagining things or if he was still there, hiding just out of sight. The paranoia seeped into my daily life, but I told no one. Part of me didn't want to seem dramatic, and another part felt guilty. Maybe I'd let him on by being friendly. Maybe I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. The breaking point came during a weekend visit to my family's home in the countryside. It was a quiet, rural area surrounded by thick woods, a place I'd always associated with safety and comfort. My brother and I were inside when we heard the dogs barking furiously, their sharp, angry sounds cutting through the stillness. My brother grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside to investigate. I stayed by the window, watching as he scanned the edge of the property near the tree line. That's when I saw it, a figure darting through the woods, barely visible in the beam of the flashlight. "Hey, stop!" my brother shouted, running toward the forest, but the figure was fast. He disappeared into the shadows, swallowed by the dense trees. When my brother returned, he was visibly shaken. "Whoever it was, they didn't belong here," he said firmly. "They were sneaking around watching the house." My stomach dropped. The figure was too far away for me to see clearly, but my mind immediately went to him. It fit, the timing, the behavior, the way he always lingered just out of sight. I didn't have proof, but I knew in my gut it was him. That night, I barely slept, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to reestablish contact with him. If I could keep him close, I thought, I could monitor his actions and prevent him from escalating further. It was a dangerous gamble, but I was desperate. Reaching out to him felt like stepping into a trap, but I had no other options. I kept the messages light, casual, pretending to mend the cracks in our strained friendship. He responded quickly, almost too eagerly, and I noticed a subtle shift in his tone. He didn't apologize or explain his absence from campus, but there was an unsettling undercurrent in his replies, as though he was testing how much I would tolerate. The strain of it all began to take its toll. My grades, which had always been solid, started slipping. I dropped one class entirely, unable to handle the pressure of showing up every week and wondering if he'd be there. I failed another, my focus shattered by the constant anxiety. My social life crumbled as well. Friends asked why I was pulling away, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the full truth. How could I explain the gnawing fear that followed me everywhere, the paranoia that made even the safest spaces feel threatening? Each day felt heavier than the last, and I began questioning every decision I made. Should I have gone to campus security? Should I have told my family? The guilt was suffocating, but I couldn't see a way out without risking making the situation worse. By the time the next semester rolled around, his presence had started to fade. I no longer saw him on campus, and the suspicious behavior seemed to taper off. I wanted to believe it was over, but I knew better than to let my guard down. Eventually, I decided to leave. I moved far from my hometown, putting distance between myself and the memories of him. I paused my education, not because I'd given up, but because I needed time to rebuild, to reflect on what I wanted and how to protect myself moving forward.